Доброго дня.
Good morning. We start our work at UCMC. Thank you to our speakers who have gathered here, whose consultations on the topic of today would cost much. But you come here to talk about the topics on the development of Ukraine, of its NGOs, civil society organizations. We start with the discussion, which is a component of USAID, such a project, which is about the change of communication and anti-corruption things, but we would like to ask a very tough question when we are talking about communication of changes such as safety projects or anti-corruption reforms project. Do we know whose interests we represent? You might have heard that the changes in Ukraine are happening due to the sandwich when Western donors and civil society move forward the society. This sandwich approach has been used for many years, and we do not understand whether civil organizations really meet the hopes of the people. There is an feeling that the civil society organizations represent the interests. That is not the critics of NGOs, but this is the task for the next year to understand target audiences and groups better. At the beginning of the year, we gather the experts to ask whether to go forward, what is the way. This is the topic of today's discussion. This is rather simple form, and I would like to give you the floor for presentations of up to 7 minutes. We have gathered here the people who have been researching this topic. Vyshlinskyi was involved in the research of several reforms of what people heard. Olga Zakharova, head of the expert council of the Ukrainian Television Academy, and she knows what people need. Like Pokalchuk, board member of the Institute for Social and Economic Research, one of the best experts on safety issues, who knows what is the aggression of Russian Federation. Andrii Andrushkiv, project manager, Center UNGO. Twice he visited different cities of Ukraine where the topic of safety. Daria, Analyst, New Europe Center, who researched the values and interests of the youth, who we use this to communicate information projects. Svitlana, Vynoslavska, Deputy Director General of Kantar TNS Ukraine. The NGO, which for the National Council of Reforms researched and communicated the reforms and their perceptions. Then there will be the round of questions and answers. Those who are watching us, you can also ask questions via internet or YouTube. I will be looking into my phone set to see your questions in the internet. We start with Svitlana Vynoslavska, Deputy Director General of Kantar TNS Ukraine. My report, please make the screen larger. My report is like an expert evaluation of many of our research. We have been monitoring efficiency of the reforms and communicating the reforms, and we also researched segmentation of the population of Ukraine on, to understand how to communicate to different segments of our population, of our citizens. First, I would like to say And then active communication, it improves the understanding and knowledge of reform among the citizens. Many citizens know about the reforms, but we are deeply concerned with their no understanding of reforms, even if we use active communication using different sources of information. The communication is not understandable, and the population of Ukraine do not understand how this would affect their lives. Communication is that every Ukrainian do not understand what would change in the lives of their households and families, and the communication, all the sources of communication are talking about corruption, but the cases of efficient combating corruption are not communicated. This is maybe no willingness of our leaders to combat corruption. This is the general opinion of Ukrainians. What we have done, we have conducted many researches, 3 researches, and segmented the population of Ukraine by their attitudes to reforms. We see 5 segments. They are changing from year to year, depending on the activities, and citizens are most active. It was larger. Maybe it was 20%, now only 10%. It is decreasing year by year because these people, individuals, are more active. They have other attitude to Ukraine, to its future, and they use sources of information in some other way. Active skeptics, they are less active, they are more declaring their activities, but they are not interested in politics. They evaluate the political situation and voice out their opinions. The next segment are people who are active only during elections. They know that they should give their votes, cast their votes, and this candidate, this politician would be making policy, but not them. They do not think that their voice have some effect on the policies. The last 40% of people are inert people and totally alienated people. They are absolutely inactive. They are for them only their families and households are important, and their finances of their families. They are most close groups, but they can hear their neighbors. To get information, we should increase activity of the 60% of citizens. So, what is the first segment? It is very active. They are citizens with political target. They understand that they can influence the leaders, the politicians. They communicate to authorities in different ways. They use various sources of information, and it is surprising, but they are more present in small towns, and we have more of them in the west of Ukraine, but less of them reside in the east and south. Active skeptics, they are, compared to the active citizens, their activities are more declarative. They are interested in politics, but from other sources of information. They are focused on executive authorities' activities. think that this executive authority's results is the indicator for them. The next segment is inhabitants, so men in the street. They monitor the situation in the country to understand for whom they would vote in the elections, to understand what the future of the country would be. When they see more critics, this influences them in negative ways. So it is important to see some efficient reforms, and they should understand how their lives are affected by the reform. The fourth segment is the less active segment, inert people. Only their own families are of interest for them. They are not interested in politics. They are not interested in the activities even in their localities. Only their own household, their families and their neighbors are of interest for them, and how their lives would be affected in terms of finances primarily. This mass of people are of lower income. That is why it is very important for them to have enough money to feed their families. Totally alienated are 10% of the population. They are absolutely uninterested in the developments in the country, and they do not link themselves to the country. It doesn't matter for them whether it is Ukraine or Russia, where they live. Their own private life are of interest for them. They are not interested in anything, and they do not have internet connection. They just watch some shows, entertainments, and TV series. Looking at these 5 segments, what channels of communications are of potential? We should concentrate our efforts on 2 segments, on the citizens and active skeptics, especially active skeptics. If they get information, they would comment this information, thus disseminating this information and their own visions of how this would influence their lives. So information from them may touch the inhabitants and maybe inner segment of citizens. So these 2 segments are more important. They are easier to communicate to. They are more accessible by communication sources, but to communicate to inhabitants and inner people, we should use these first 2 segments to address the next 2 segments. The channels of information which are used are TV and internet. These 2 segments use different channels. Along with most rating TV channels who are watched by everyone, on those channels they watch different programs. The 2 segments differ in those channels which they watch. If we focus only on the central national TV channels, we could be inefficient. The generalized information may be not perceived by different segments. Participation in volunteers' activities is characteristic for active citizens. Active skeptics, they disseminate information. They read information and disseminate it via social media. They are well educated, and it is important for them to share their knowledge. The last what we should remember. First, we should give cases, best cases of efficient reforms or efficient overcoming of corruption. We should give cases of individuals who have their own private experiences, because people believe in such individual cases. Also, the presentation of information is also important for Ukrainians. If this is education reform, what would happen to the family of these individuals, of their children? This is the only way for Ukrainians to understand how the reform would work. Reform should be communicated on case-by-case basis. This is a way to address the citizens. And the last item is we should correctly choose the TV channels. We should choose the TV channels which they watch. Thank you very much for your presentation and your data. We will give the floor to the think tanks with their researches, and then we would give the floor to businessmen and safety experts, and then Andrii would be given the floor to talk about how we can use this. Daria Haidai, Analyst, New Europe Center, you have conducted the research which is of very high interest for the youth, because it is about youth. Yeah, this is our research about the Ukrainian youth, their values and orientations, and we use the German methodology. German counterparts have been researching the youth with this methodology for many years. Our research is very detailed, and the ages are limited. We address only youth up to 29 years, because all other research they focused on youth up to 35 years. So our research may differ by some parameters from other sociological polls. We got the picture of a young Ukrainian under 30, and we saw not optimistic picture. There is a stereotype that young people are drivers of reforms. They are those who can implement the reform and support them and initiate changes. But we saw that in the regions, youth usually is passive. Only 4% are interested in politics, 13% are interested in politics. The young people, they are either not interested or absolutely not interested in politics. Only each fifth is ready to be active, but only 4% are taking part in some activities in reality. So our young people are alienated. It is interesting why it is so. European experience is interested. The earthquake of youth is a new term in European terminology. It was a positive signal against the background on this news about populism. This is youth that could be the force to counteract the radical ideas, populists, and so on. And in the USA, it was like that. The electors of the Democratic Party are young people. In Great Britain, for Brexit, youth voted for Brexit. In the Netherlands, for pro-European parties, youth voted, but there was an example which demonstrated that young people not always vote for pro-European parties. It was France. Because in France, a part of young people voted for Macron, but about 30% of youth under 24, they voted for Le Pen. Why it is so that this populistic party was supported by youth? Because this segment of French youth, they are pessimistic about their future. They do not see prospects for themselves in the job market. This is very characteristic for Ukrainian people. In Ukraine, 70% are optimistic, but in the east and in the south, the happy young people who are optimistic about their future, it is lower than in the north and Kiev region and in the western regions. In the east, there are only 50%. Optimists are only 50%. So this share of pessimistic young persons, they are inclined to vote for populists who offer simple decisions and solutions, and they would not vote at all. Or they do not believe that something could be changed, so the youth is the resource that could be used for changes, for promoting the changes. And at the regional level, we should understand that this level of disbelief among youth is very common. It is connected to lack of jobs, to different social factors which are not so bad as you see. Maybe one of the recommendations how we see that is to open opportunities to the youth in the east and in the south, to demonstrate to the youth new prospects, because in the east and in the south, young people sometimes do not see the prospect. Now we are given the floor to Vyshlinskyi from the Center for Economic Strategy. When we are talking about economic reforms, it seems that economic reforms communication is given only like declaration of quotations. This does not help in our work. Have you researched this sense? Our research, which we conducted at the end of summer and published in the autumn, I would tell you about our findings. It is close to the conclusions which Kantar TNS Ukraine did. The low level of communication of reforms is observed. We looked not only on the support to the reforms, we looked on the support by people of the ideas on which the reforms are based. The reforms are not just changes. They are different changes. This is not one uniform change. Some changes could be popular, some could be not, and we saw the trend that if the confidence in our authorities is low compared to 2013 in the first half of the year, even if we have support from oppositional forces. This means, in fact, that the political leaders, they could not be the source of direct mass population support. For example, the pension reform, 46% were pro and 40% were contra the reform. We asked whether the strict requirements to the working experience period, 84% supported the strict requirements. Also, oppositional leaders were saying this is the covered increase in the pension age, but we saw that justice is more important for our population than conditional benefits or losses for them privately, individually. The same concerns the medical reforms. Health reform, 44% are for and 52% are against it. The model proposed by the healthcare ministry, when there is the guaranteed minimum which is free of charge, 87% supported the reforms. There was one more formulation as to the transparent mechanism of co-payments. We saw a very high level of consent, which was higher than the share of those who supported the reform of healthcare system in general. So transparency maintenance is vastly supported because money would provide for the reform, not the constitution. If the state pay for you from your taxes paid. So, in fact, when we look onto the perception of the reforms, we lie to ourselves because we are talking about the opinions and attitudes to the reforms, partially and partially to our regime authorities. In general, people support the things which they understand, and those things which they understand worse, they do not support them. So they can, where they can make conclusions, there they provide support. We saw that more people have experience with the education system, healthcare system. Less people think of what is happening to the state-owned enterprises, where we need to privatize them. The other was about the attitude to... We saw the influence to the support of reforms and the difference between the support to reform in general and support to individual components of the reform, the most radical cases, privatization. Out of 5 reforms on the agenda of our government, privatization was supported by the lowest share of people. Private owners are more efficient. They would provide prevention of embezzlements. Strategic investors should be engaged. So the share support was the same as to those reforms where the reforms are supported by a large number of people. The second conclusion, the better you understand, the more you support the reform. Talking about social demography, I have been working for 15 years in sociological polls. I have not conducted formal analysis, but upon looking through, I can say that social demographic parameter, which is socially correlated, this is welfare. The higher the welfare of our population in linear fashion. It does not concern the group of the person. The better the welfare, the more support the person voice out to the reforms. For many reforms, we didn't see any progress in youth perceptions. We saw very clearly that the privatization was supported lower, because people of older ages, they are more for state-owned enterprises because they used to Soviet type of management of enterprises. In some reforms, for example, such as healthcare reform, there was the only case where we saw the group which was against reform because they understood that they would lose from the reform. They are people who are of so low income that they can't buy anything, drugs or services. They were afraid that they would lose even that excess, that small excess which they have. The design of reform should be looked in terms of how we can support this group of population. The last is that we saw, this should be compared with the segmentation our colleagues presented today, but although the government is trusted by a low percentage of population, although confidence in the government is low, there was some group which really responded to the communication.
So, please present the slide with the segmentation, and I give the floor to Oleg Pokalchuk. So you had this, if you had the system of segmentation, with whom would you start with? With citizens, with people from the streets? So as a politician, I would just speak about what I wanted to speak without answering the question. So 60 years ago, there was a book, and the author said that in times of war, the information becomes obsolete very quickly, and I believe that now it becomes obsolete even more quickly. And in information operations, we have 3 segments of activity: physical, information, and cognitive. And in media polemics, we mix information and cognitive spheres. We speak about information and cognitive processes, and we believe that there are some cognitive effects, but in the course of survey, people act as subjects, and when they take decisions, they base their actions on other things, and then we try to correlate it with their values that they had. And practically, there are 2 things that should be taken into account if we want to change behavior. Any influence, any communication has a sense if the behavior of people changes in the result. So otherwise, these are just discussions about nothing. Measure of performance and measure of effectiveness in communication. So if you do not have the method how you measure the efficiency, if you cannot measure precisely, so what are you going to assess? The cognitive or emotional sphere? And also tactics, this is what we have in our analytical area. So we have a lot of people who deal with strategy. Operative area is missing, and the sums of tactics are usually called strategy. But when we are speaking about the perception of reforms, we should understand that if we want to influence something, there are changes that would happen anyway. They will be painful or less painful. There are only 2 options. And there is a situational behavior of people. And if you provide them with efficient information, they can, using this information, they can minimize the risks. So this is all. And if we are speaking about corruption component, we should differentiate in Ukrainian reality it as a systemic phenomena that starts at the level of budget code, 25%, and also illegal actions so we have systemic corruption, and this situation should be changed. And so I would like to say that the problem is of moral character. If you want to impact through providing information, the information is not only the only way of influence. And if you want to have an end result, you should understand the price we pay for this, including moral price. This is an open question. You can force any group to do something. You can bring a horse to water, but you cannot force the horse to drink the water. So if you think that there is a duck, maybe it's not a duck. This is a simulator. So, Olga Zakharova, how does it correlate with what you see? And you are a representative of the commercial company. How can it be used in our daily work, in the work of NGOs? So I heard a lot of interesting things from my colleagues. We thank you for mentioning design of reforms. Why people understood pension reform? Because they understood the end result of this reform, that the pension age is going to be increased, and what will be the result of healthcare reform. So it was successfully introduced. What are we talking about? So they said that reforms are necessary for our survival. Okay. And Ukraine is heading to Europe, and Ukraine decided to become a European country. And what percentage of our population saw any European country? And where are they? In the West. Why the West understands reforms better than the South or other regions? These are simple things. I would start with those who start these reforms. They should understand that they are speaking not about themselves, not about their close circles, but they are speaking about target audience, and the target audience has a problem, and a reform should solve this problem. And then in what way it will do it, and there should be results published, and then they should monitor the first step, whether it brings us closer to a result, and what are the deviations, and who is responsible for this. And then step by step, in a systemic way, we will be able to improve communication. And in my opinion, this is the only way. Andrii Andrushkiv, Center UA. So how these recommendations can be used by NGOs, and also they should report some results to their donors and in the social media. So this communication and its importance in the activity of NGO. So in the majority of NGO, if you look at their sites, or you look at their documents, they want to introduce irreversible changes and to defend the rights of Ukrainians, whether it is a patients' organization or the organization of dogs owners. And the problem starts when you ask the representatives of such NGOs, when did you communicate with these people? And now they screen Dark Times movie, and Churchill goes to the tube to communicate with people, and this is a simple way that explains a lot of things. And in our organization in 2015, 2016, we saw that our parliament is not able to properly carry out changes. We understood this problem with the parliament in Ukraine, and maybe there is high probability that new electoral law will change the situation. And in our opinion, and in the opinion of the experts who joined us in UCMC, we wanted to introduce new electoral system, and this will provide better support to coalition, and this will promote the development of the state. But we said that, and as NGO, we cannot promote this. We should first communicate with people in the regions and we carried out 60 consultations last year in regional centers, and for 2.5 or 3 hours we spoke with the local government, business, and citizens, and also the Ministry of Healthcare also provided such communication, and acting Minister of Healthcare, Oleh, said that we have a draft law that will start the reform, but we believe that we won't have proper support in the parliament, and we advise to hold consultations with the doctors, with the local government, with participation in the regional centers, with participation of the minister, of deputy minister. And we were told that Zaporizhia is a terrible city because there is the trade union of ambulance service, and people have been working according to some protocols since 1965, and we understood that this city is difficult, and we decided that the minister should go there, and she should provide consultations there. And this is also help to the ministry, and the support was going from doctors, and we said that we will speak about these key groups of support. And this is the basic manual of William Dunn that is recommended for reading, and it says that there should be a map of stakeholders created, and you should communicate and discuss the issues with people, and so the majority of laws that are adopted in the parliament, they do not differ from the laws of the 16th of January in the procedure. And going back to the youth, we we had 2 trips to the regions, and first time we thought that the youth is wonderful audience, and we communicated with the universities, with the faculties of sociology, of political studies, but this was really terrible. We had an impression that the roof is going down, and we wanted to speak about democratic changes with students, and young people started the revolution of dignity, and we believe that these people are the same, and we prepared for the second tour, and we provided a lecture for them, and at the start of the lecture we asked to provide 3 people, and they ordered pizza, and then I started to speak about electoral system in Ukraine, and at the end it turned out those people who ordered people, they didn't take into account that there are people who do not eat meat, or who have some health problems, and 60% were not satisfied with the results. And here we provided information about electoral process, and this provided effect, and people subscribed to our pages on Facebook, and they said that they will distribute leaflets if we provide these leaflets to them. So we worked with the medium-sized business, and we had coffee in the evening with them, because they do not have time during the day. They are busy. That's why we had an evening format with them, and this provides a slow effect. And in times of Yanukovych, we got accustomed, and during the first year of the Revolution of Dignity, we got accustomed to quick effects of advocacy, and all this process was really quick, and now political elites they are much they became bolder, and NGOs and young political forces. I ask them, whom do you represent? Who are your voters? And when was the last time you did you speak to these people? So they should communicate with the audiences. Otherwise, we will be governed by the wrong people.
I would like to ask a little more complicated question. There were no simple sense in the textbooks for students. On the one hand, there are politicians who are saying what should be told to the population, who focus only on information noise, creating it. When we are talking about anti-corruption activities, saying that anti-corruption is not only Miho Saakashvili, but there is also this anti-corruption activities not concern not only imprisoning the president or not imprisoning him. The top against the background of very large and loud informational noise, can we really launch some efficient topics which are important? Of course, yes. Yes, there are many topics which just make zombie of our population, and the behavior of the citizens who demonstrate such a game as if they are zombied. And I would like to put this option into quotes. This type, this approach, which for different audiences segments should be very short, we should target them. I heard my colleagues and I agree very much with their conclusions. First of all, as concerns the youth in our segmentation, we saw that the youth is not active. We thought they are more active. We thought the most of active citizens would be of young age, but it was not so. Youth is even largely included into totally alienated segment of people. Our school children should be addressed with education, with enlightenment work. Their public awareness should be raised because they are our future and they can change the country. What is most interesting that along with the school children, their parents would be educated. The most active are people from 25 to 40 years of age. They have school children of school age, and if those children study the subjects which provide understanding of the processes in the state, their parents would also understand these topics. These are our conclusions from our research. The factor of financial incomes is also important criteria. People who has incomes, who has jobs, they have sins to protect. So this criteria, the criteria of income is very important in segmentation. Questions, please. Leonid Khomyakov, economic analysis. I have been addressing all my life the improvement of large management systems, and it was interesting for me to hear about the same shortcomings in the reform approaches as we had 20 years ago and 40 years ago. The research into communication between activists and youth, this is the preparation of the resource, but people are interested in the results. I am interested in what do you have such an income as a forecast that the law signed by the president about the anti-corruption union would result in response from the IMF? And one more question. I think you should better select the target segment and address only this segment. Only very limited segment could make reforms in reality. The question of real interest, is it possible to communicate the forecast which outcome may some law bring? Communication is a process and different things could be communicated, and forecasting means vision. In our understanding, forecasting is 5 to 10 year perspective. We lack such category in our working segment as a target segment. We have strategy and tactics. Strategy is let's be for everything good against everything bad. I think this sector needs NATO standards. I think we should think not about focus, but about the consequences of the adoption of some laws. Whatever the baseline, whatever our evaluation of the baseline, the governmental policy has improved for 3 years, and not only communication tools. Such standards that infographics is prepared for the laws, which is easily comprehensible for people. The outcomes would be so and so. This shouldn't we communicate. This is what the tour of healthcare ministry staff members around the country is providing to us. First, one system of financing would be adopted, and it is expected that the executive authorities would close the inefficient hospitals which do not provide enough services to patients. As a result, this money would be used for something which is required to patients more, and the result, people become healthier, and in some time we will see that the longevity of lives, the life expectations improved among our population, life expectancy improved. But we can't say that in 1 year the life expectancy may improve. It is a long process. And moreover, I would like to mention an important aspect which is omitted by Ukrainian government: to correct policy incorporating the feedback from the target audiences. For example, the healthcare reform project. The project could be written in the best manner, but for example, the Donetsk region has quite another format of hospital districts than other regions of Ukraine. Always we have the problem of local specifics. For example, the cities with railways have a railway companies hospital where there are many staff members employed who are not needed. Well, we have made a large step in communications in the recent 3 years, but the governmental policy has not improved. The government should be not the station sending signals to the population, to the voters, like to the space. This should be the government should also correct their policy, incorporating the feedback from the population. Communication, incorporating of feedback in the communication, this is correct thing. Why people they hear when you, they listen to you when you talk, but the communication to civilians and to militaries in other countries, the procedures are written in a very detailed manner, step by step, by all stages. There is an algorithm which you respect and follow strictly. I am Vynoslavska Olga. I represent the Department of Social Communications of Kyiv City. I have interesting experience. 5 days ago I was a civil activist and an author of 2 public projects. Maybe you heard that in Kyiv for the second time there are public projects implemented. Approximately 150,000 Kyivites voted for. On this position, I would be making an information campaign for Kyivites so that they can the opportunity to communicate with governmental authorities And you now raise the question how this communication should be organized between activists and governmental bodies. The authors, we understand what is the public budget. I would like to address sociologists whether they are interested in learning, in studying this topic, what changes are happening among Kievites upon the implementation of this public project, where we have feedback from community to the authorities, not only in Kiev. Please, another question. Timothy Banikiev, Parents for Vaccination NGO. Talking about the topic of this briefing, who are the change makers? Do you have the definition? Who are them? Do they understand that they are providers of the reforms? Do you have the answer to this question? If we imagine change makers, good people can do bad things and bad people can make good things. I do not like to generalize. Looking into the reforms, they are life. So there is a segment of people who, regardless of the age, they just are inherent to development regardless of geography or age, and they are not numerous, and they are isolated by the community because they are not easily manipulated. They have their own ideas and they incline to development. So I would base on qualifications and on the experiences of others. It seems that commercial TV channels, they are alleged that they are oriented only on inert audiences. Do we need some other channels? I am now spelling the myths which are very common. I do not know how to answer this question. Commercial TV channels, they are business channels. This is not the topic of today's discussion. Whatever the business, political business or selling toothpaste, commercial TV channels are always focused on increasing the share of their audiences or on maintaining the number of their audiences. And they would always research this audience, hear their audiences, listen to their audiences, and try to forecast the changes in the attitudes of these audiences. And commercial channels, they are focused not only increasing the number of their audiences, but on selling their audiences, regardless of the individual product they sell. They look for rich and active group of people. This is what commercial channels are focused on. This inert group who are consumers of products, They watch only serials and comedies which make their lives better. They do not watch news programs, they do not watch such information, and they try to avoid it. What Russian channels did? I saw this example when I saw some shows or feature films into advertising. They included news, political advertising. This was in 2014 and 2015. I watched shows on those TV channels. They addressed the inner group of audience by advertising on commercial channels. What is the share of TV channels ownership pattern in Russia? In Russia, 100% of channels are state channels. I mean news channels. Commercial channels who pay more, that one gains more. What is bad in comedies? Reforms could be communicated via certain genres. Our entertainment experts are doing this. There is an opinion among sociologists, although I am cooperating with TNS, an individual is not limited in genres. A person could watch both news and comedies. They always have in Ukraine they watch different channels and make their own conclusions. We are talking that serials, watching serials is bad. No. TV series, this is good. Our thinking is post-Soviet. We think that we can communicate only via news programs. No, this is not so. I do not... I'm not against your opinion. We should take into consideration that this audience is less active. They are Russian speaking. We should address them in Russian, even if they watch Ukrainian channels. I have conducted systemic research. TNS made this research for me. And it proves that our viewers, they do not remember what language was of the program he or she watched, because our audience understands both languages, Ukrainian and Russian. We are bilingual. We live in bilingual environment. When we are saying only Ukrainian or only Russian, this means that we limit ourselves. People do not remember what was the language of the program. Once one leading channel researched whether they would lose their viewers if they communicate content in Ukrainian, and the result was no. When they included bilingual products, they were surprised, because our viewers, they do not understand who is left and who is right. Thank you very much for your discussion. The details are very important. Sometimes we think there are very easy answers to questions. Unfortunately, we should finish the discussion because we are giving the floor soon to our ATO speaker. I would like to invite you to our next discussion next year, where we will be able to measure